Remember those budget meals only in old Betty Crocker cookbooks? They helped families stretch every dollar with warm, simple food. How did these comforting classics disappear from our tables? Cornmeal casserole was a staple in many American homes, especially when budgets were tight and stretching ingredients mattered most. This simple baked dish combined basic pantry staples like cornmeal, eggs, and milk to create a hearty side, or even a main dish that could feed a family without breaking the bank. The recipe was straightforward enough for beginner cooks and required no fancy equipment or ingredients. Cornmeal gave the casserole a slightly grainy texture and a comforting golden color, while the eggs acted as a binder to hold everything together during baking. Milk added richness and moisture, ensuring the casserole was never dry or bland. Families could easily adjust the seasoning to taste, sometimes adding a pinch of salt, pepper, or a dash of sugar depending on what was on hand. This casserole often appeared in community cookbooks and government pamphlets encouraging economical meal planning during lean times. It was versatile too, sometimes served plain alongside soup or stews, and other times topped with leftover vegetables or bits of cheese when available. For many, cornmeal casserole was more than just food. It was a symbol of resourcefulness and comfort, a way to make modest ingredients feel like a feast on the table. Canned salmon loaf was an ingenious recipe born out of necessity and creativity, turning an affordable protein source into a filling and flavorful meal. Using canned salmon as the base, this loaf mixed in eggs, breadcrumbs, and sometimes simple seasonings to stretch the fish into a substantial dish that could serve several hungry mouths. The ingredients were easy to find in most pantries, especially during times when fresh meat and fish were scarce or expensive. Eggs helped to bind the mixture, while breadcrumbs gave the loaf structure and texture. This recipe also made excellent use of leftovers. Sometimes small amounts of cooked vegetables or a splash of cream would be added for extra flavor and moisture. Canned salmon loaf was baked until golden brown on the outside and tender inside, making it a perfect entree to serve with mashed potatoes, steamed greens, or a simple salad. The dish reflected a time when canned goods were prized for their long shelf life and convenience, and when home cooks had to be resourceful to feed their families. Mock biscuits and gravy was a clever way to enjoy a classic Southern comfort food without the usual cost or effort. These biscuits were made from basic ingredients like flour, baking powder, fat, and milk or water, often skipping eggs to keep costs down. Despite the simplicity, the biscuits came out tender and flaky, perfect for soaking up gravy. The gravy itself was a budget-friendly white sauce made from milk, flour, and fat, flavored with salt and pepper, and sometimes enhanced with bits of cooked vegetables or leftover meat drippings. This version of biscuits and gravy was especially popular in families who wanted to stretch a small amount of ingredients into a filling breakfast or dinner. The gravy was thick and creamy, coating each biscuit and making each bite comforting and satisfying. Mock biscuits and gravy appeared frequently in old Betty Crocker cookbooks as a go-to recipe for economical cooking. It was accessible for cooks of all skill levels and didn't require expensive or exotic ingredients. Stuffed bell peppers with rice and ground meat was a budget-friendly recipe that made the most of limited meat supplies by pairing them with inexpensive fillers. This dish took hollowed-out bell peppers and filled them with a mixture of cooked rice, small amounts of ground meat, onions, and seasonings to create a hearty and colorful meal. The rice acted as a filler, absorbing flavors and stretching the meat to feed more people. Peppers were often chosen for their availability and mild flavor, which complemented the savory filling without overpowering it. The stuffed peppers were baked until tender, sometimes topped with a light sprinkle of cheese or tomato sauce for extra richness if available. This recipe appeared often in mid-century cookbooks as an example of practical cooking that balanced nutrition, taste, and cost. It was a way to make meat go further without sacrificing flavor or appearance. The dish brought color and variety to the table, making mealtime more appealing during an era when fresh produce was seasonal and meat was rationed. Stuffed bell peppers embodied the ingenuity of cooks adapting to economic constraints with simple, satisfying solutions. Baked bean and sausage casserole was a slow-cooked, hearty dish combining canned beans with small pieces of sausage to create a flavorful and affordable meal. Beans, often navy or kidney varieties, were a pantry staple thanks to their low cost, long shelf life, and high protein content. Adding sausage pieces, sometimes leftover or inexpensive links, brought a smoky richness that enhanced the beans without requiring large amounts of meat. The casserole was assembled in a baking dish, sometimes with onions or seasonings layered in, then baked slowly to let the flavors meld. This recipe was beloved for its simplicity and versatility. It could feed a family with minimal ingredients and effort. It was common in community cookbooks aimed at budget-conscious home cooks during the mid-1900s, especially during times of rationing or economic difficulty. Baked bean and sausage casserole was often served with bread or a simple salad, making it a complete and filling meal. The dish exemplified the era's focus on making affordable ingredients taste satisfying and comforting at the family table. Creamed corn pudding was a creamy, slightly sweet-baked side dish that offered both comfort and affordability to families on a budget. Made from canned or fresh corn combined with milk, eggs, a bit of sugar, and flour or breadcrumbs to thicken, this pudding was baked until golden and set. The creamy texture and natural sweetness of the corn made it appealing even to picky eaters and was a great way to stretch limited fresh vegetables. This dish was a favorite in old Betty Crocker cookbooks, especially during seasons when fresh corn was not available or when rationing made fresh produce scarce. It could be served alongside roasted meats or enjoyed on its own as a satisfying vegetarian option. The recipe was straightforward and used ingredients commonly found in most kitchens, emphasizing ease and economy without sacrificing flavor. Creamed corn pudding was a testament to mid-century home cooking ingenuity, turning humble pantry staples into a dish that felt indulgent and nourishing. Vegetable hash with leftover meat was a practical and delicious way to turn small scraps into a filling meal. This dish combined diced potatoes and a variety of vegetables such as onions, peppers, or carrots, sautéed together with bits of leftover cooked meat like ham, beef, or chicken. The hash was cooked until the potatoes were crispy on the outside and tender on the inside, while the vegetables softened and the meat added savory depth. This recipe was a favorite for families looking to avoid waste and make the most of every ingredient. It appeared in many mid-century cookbooks under various names and was praised for its flexibility. You could use whatever vegetables or meats you had on hand, making it especially useful during lean times. Served for breakfast, lunch, or dinner, vegetable hash was simple, affordable, and satisfying. It represented the spirit of resourceful cooking that defined budget meals in American kitchens during the 1900s. Vegetable loaf, also known as meatless meatloaf, was a creative way to enjoy a comforting classic without using expensive meat. This loaf combined grated or finely chopped vegetables such as carrots, zucchini, and onions with grains like rice or breadcrumbs to bind the mixture. Eggs or milk were added to hold it all together before baking the mixture into a firm, sliceable loaf. Seasonings and herbs were used to enhance flavor, making the dish tasty enough to stand on its own or to accompany a simple sauce or gravy. Vegetable loaf was a popular recipe in old Betty Crocker cookbooks because it offered an affordable, nutritious alternative during times when meat was scarce or costly. It was often served as a main dish with potatoes or steamed greens, providing both comfort and sustenance. This recipe reflected mid-century home cooks' ingenuity in creating meatless meals that felt satisfying and wholesome without straining the household budget. Potato and onion frittata was a budget-friendly egg casserole combining inexpensive ingredients to make a filling and nutritious dish. Eggs were beaten and mixed with diced or grated potatoes and sautéed onions, then baked or cooked slowly on the stovetop until set. The potatoes added heartiness and bulk, while onions provided sweetness and flavor. This dish was easy to prepare and used staple pantry ingredients that were often on hand, making it a popular choice for families trying to maximize limited food supplies. The frittata could be served hot or cold, making it versatile for meals throughout the day. Its simplicity and adaptability meant home cooks could add herbs or leftover cheese if available, but it did not depend on any special or costly ingredients. Potato and onion frittata appeared in many vintage cookbooks as a practical meal solution during difficult economic times, embodying the resourceful and comforting nature of budget cooking. Cabbage and noodles skillet was a quick and economical meal that combined sautéed cabbage with egg noodles for a simple yet satisfying dish. Cabbage was often abundant and inexpensive, making it a reliable vegetable during times when other produce might be costly or scarce. Egg noodles added texture and carbohydrates, turning the dish into a filling meal suitable for lunch or dinner. The cabbage was typically cooked with onions and a bit of fat or butter to bring out its natural sweetness and mellow bitterness. Seasonings were kept simple, focusing on salt and pepper or a dash of vinegar to brighten flavors. This recipe was common in old Betty Crocker cookbooks and regional American kitchens, especially those influenced by Eastern European traditions. The dish showcased how humble ingredients could be transformed into a nourishing meal that stretched budgets without sacrificing taste or satisfaction. Rice pudding with raisins was a beloved sweet treat in many American homes, especially when families wanted to make the most of leftover rice. This dessert combined cooked rice with milk, sugar, and often a splash of vanilla or cinnamon for flavor. Raisins added a natural sweetness and a chewy texture that brightened each spoonful. The recipe was simple and affordable, relying on staples that most kitchens already had. Rice pudding was usually baked or simmered slowly until it became creamy and thick, offering comfort after a humble meal. This dish was often served warm but could also be enjoyed cold, making it a versatile option for different seasons. Because rice was inexpensive and filling, rice pudding was a perfect way to end a meal without wasting leftovers or expensive ingredients. It appeared frequently in Betty Crocker cookbooks and community recipe collections, highlighting its importance in budget-conscious cooking. Families appreciated rice pudding, not only for its taste, but also because it felt like a small indulgence during lean times. It brought sweetness and warmth to the table when resources were scarce, showing how simple ingredients could create something memorable. Creamed mushrooms on toast was a popular snack or light meal that combined mushrooms cooked in a creamy white sauce served over toasted bread. This dish was a favorite in budget cooking because it used inexpensive ingredients that were easy to find or preserve. Mushrooms added an earthy flavor and meaty texture, which paired well with the smooth, rich sauce made from butter, flour, and milk. The toasted bread provided a crunchy contrast and a filling base to soak up the creamy topping. This recipe was commonly found in old Betty Crocker cookbooks, where it was praised for its simplicity and satisfying taste. It could be prepared quickly, making it a convenient option for busy families or those with limited cooking skills. Creamed mushrooms on toast was often served as a snack, a light lunch, or a meatless dinner, showing its versatility in the mid-century kitchen. It was also a clever way to stretch ingredients and add variety to the weekly meal plan without extra cost. Mock cheese soufflé was a light and airy baked dish that cleverly substituted expensive cheese with more affordable pantry items while still delivering a rich flavor and elegant texture. Using eggs as a base, the recipe incorporated pantry cheese substitutes, often processed or powdered cheese, combined with milk or cream to achieve a creamy consistency. The soufflé rose in the oven to create a fluffy, delicate dish that felt special despite its humble ingredients. Mock cheese soufflé was a way for home cooks to enjoy the luxury of a baked cheese dish without the cost or availability of real cheese. It appeared in vintage Betty Crocker cookbooks as a budget-friendly recipe perfect for special occasions or family dinners when resources were tight. This dish required some technique but rewarded effort with its impressive appearance and comforting taste. Often served as a side or a light main course, mock cheese soufflé exemplified the ingenuity of cooks adapting classic recipes to fit limited means. Chicken and rice bake with cream soup was a classic casserole that stretched small amounts of chicken by combining it with rice and canned cream soup to create a creamy, filling meal. This recipe was especially popular during times when fresh meat was scarce or expensive, as the canned soup added moisture, flavor, and richness without much cost. Rice, being an inexpensive staple, bulked up the dish, turning it into a hearty main course that could feed a family. The cream soup acted as a simple sauce, binding the chicken and rice together while keeping the casserole moist during baking. This meal was easy to prepare and required few ingredients, making it accessible for home cooks of all levels. It was frequently featured in old Betty Crocker cookbooks and community recipe collections as an economical and comforting dinner option. Chicken and rice bake with cream soup was a practical solution for weekday meals, providing nourishment and warmth while using pantry staples and affordable ingredients. It remains a nostalgic reminder of mid-century home cooking focused on resourcefulness and taste. Vegetable pancakes, often made with grated zucchini or carrot, were a popular way to use seasonal produce in a budget-friendly, tasty dish. These pancakes combined shredded vegetables with flour and eggs to create a batter that was fried until golden and crispy. The result was a versatile dish that could be served as a side, snack, or light main course, offering a nutritious boost without much cost. Vegetable pancakes were a clever way to stretch limited ingredients, especially during times when fresh vegetables were precious or rationed. This recipe was common in vintage Betty Crocker cookbooks, which encouraged cooks to use whatever vegetables were available to create satisfying meals. Often seasoned simply with salt, pepper, and herbs, these pancakes showcased the natural flavors and textures of the vegetables while delivering a comforting crunch. They could be served with sauces, dips, or alongside main dishes, making them adaptable to many tastes and occasions. Mock veal cutlets were an inventive way to mimic the popular and pricier veal dishes by using more affordable cuts of pork or chicken breaded and prepared similarly. The meat was pounded thin, coated in breadcrumbs, and fried or baked to achieve a crispy exterior and tender interior. This preparation allowed families to enjoy the taste and texture of veal cutlets without the higher cost or limited availability. Old Betty Crocker cookbooks featured this recipe as a budget-conscious alternative, appealing to home cooks who wanted to serve elegant meals on a tight budget. The dish was often served with simple sides like mashed potatoes or steamed vegetables, completing a satisfying and wholesome plate. Mock veal cutlets demonstrated the resourcefulness of cooks in adapting traditional recipes to fit economic realities, proving that flavor and presentation did not have to be sacrificed for affordability. This recipe was a favorite for special occasions or family dinners when stretching ingredients while maintaining a sense of indulgence was important. Scalloped corn and potato bake was a creamy, layered casserole combining sweet corn and thinly sliced potatoes for a comforting and economical side dish. The recipe involved layering the vegetables with a simple white sauce made from milk, butter, and flour, then baking until bubbly and golden on top. This dish was popular in mid-century America, especially when fresh ingredients were limited or expensive. Canned corn was often used to keep costs low and convenience high, while potatoes provided hearty bulk to the casserole. Scalloped corn and potato bake appeared frequently in Betty Crocker cookbooks as a versatile recipe that complemented many main dishes. It could be served at family dinners or holiday meals, offering warmth and familiarity with minimal expense. The creamy texture and subtle sweetness made it appealing to children and adults alike, providing a satisfying balance of flavor and comfort. This casserole showcased the resourcefulness of cooks who transformed simple ingredients into dishes that felt special and nourishing despite tight budgets. Jello salad with fruit cocktail was a staple side dish in many mid-century American households, known for its colorful appearance and sweet, refreshing taste. This salad combined flavored gelatin with canned fruit cocktail, often including peaches, pears, and cherries suspended in the wobbly mixture. The dish was easy to prepare and required minimal fresh ingredients, making it popular during times when fresh produce was less accessible or affordable. Jello salad was frequently featured in old Betty Crocker cookbooks and church cookbooks as a potluck favorite and a way to add a festive touch to meals. The salad could be served chilled, providing a cool contrast to heavier dishes, and its bright colors made it visually appealing at family gatherings or community events. While sometimes mocked today for its texture, Jello salad was cherished for its convenience, affordability, and nostalgic connection to home cooking. It represented the mid-century American spirit of making the most of canned goods and simple ingredients to create something cheerful and satisfying. Rice and egg salad was a cold dish combining boiled rice, chopped hard-boiled eggs, mayonnaise, and simple seasonings to create a budget-friendly and filling salad. This recipe was a practical way to use leftover rice and eggs. two staples that were often readily available and affordable in most homes. The mayonnaise added creaminess, binding the ingredients together while enhancing flavor. Rice and egg salad could be served as a light lunch, picnic dish, or side at dinner, offering a refreshing alternative to heavier meals. The salad was flexible. Home cooks could add chopped celery, onions, or herbs if they had them, but the core ingredients remained inexpensive and easy to prepare. This dish was a common feature in Betty Crocker cookbooks during the mid-20th century, representing the era's focus on simplicity, economy, and making the most of leftovers. Rice and egg salad exemplified how basic ingredients could be combined into a tasty and satisfying dish that supported families through lean times. Meat and potato pie was a simple and hearty baked dish made by layering seasoned ground meat with mashed potatoes inside a pastry crust or casserole dish. This recipe was prized for its ability to stretch limited amounts of meat by pairing it with inexpensive potatoes, creating a filling meal that could feed multiple people. The meat was typically ground beef or a mix of available meats, seasoned with onions and herbs to boost flavor. The mashed potatoes acted as a comforting topping or base, adding texture and bulk to the dish. Meat and potato pie was a common recipe in Betty Crocker cookbooks and community cookbooks, especially during times of economic hardship when families needed to maximize their ingredients. It was often served with simple vegetables or a salad, rounding out the meal with nutrition and color. This pie was a favorite for family dinners, providing warmth and satisfaction while exemplifying the resourcefulness of mid-century home cooks. Canned peaches with cottage cheese was a simple yet satisfying budget dessert or snack that combined the sweetness of canned peaches with the creamy texture of cottage cheese. This pairing was popular in many American homes where fresh fruit and rich desserts were not always affordable or available. The peaches provided natural sugar and a pleasant juiciness, while the cottage cheese added protein and a mild tang that balanced the sweetness. This dish required minimal preparation, making it perfect for busy households or those with limited cooking skills. It appeared often in vintage Betty Crocker cookbooks as a nutritious, low-cost option that could be served as a light dessert, afternoon snack, or even a breakfast side. Families appreciated this combination for its wholesome ingredients and comforting flavors, especially during times when indulging in richer treats was not an option. The dish reflected the mid-century emphasis on simplicity and economy in the kitchen without sacrificing taste or satisfaction. Baked spaghetti loaf was a creative way to turn leftover spaghetti into a sliceable, shareable meal that stretched ingredients and minimized waste. This dish combined cooked spaghetti noodles with tomato sauce, cheese, and sometimes eggs or breadcrumbs, all baked together in a loaf pan. The result was a firm yet tender casserole that could be cut into neat slices for easy serving. This recipe was popular in old Betty Crocker cookbooks as an economical dinner option that could feed a family on a budget. It was especially helpful for using up leftovers in a new and appealing form. Baked spaghetti loaf could be served hot or cold, making it versatile for different meals and occasions. The cheesy, saucy flavors were comforting and familiar, reminding families of Italian-American favorites, but with a practical twist. This dish exemplified mid-century ingenuity in turning simple pantry staples into satisfying, budget-conscious meals. Turkey and rice casserole was a practical recipe that allowed families to stretch leftover turkey by combining it with rice, vegetables, and a creamy sauce. This dish was especially popular during the holiday season when turkey was served in abundance but leftovers were plentiful. The rice provided bulk and absorbed the rich flavors from the turkey and sauce, creating a filling main course. Vegetables like peas or carrots were often added for color, nutrition, and texture. Cream soups or homemade white sauces were used to bind the casserole, keeping it moist and flavorful during baking. Turkey and rice casserole appeared frequently in mid-century Betty Crocker cookbooks as a comforting way to avoid food waste while offering a warm, satisfying meal. It required few ingredients, most of which were staples in the kitchen, and could be prepared in advance for convenience. This dish was a nostalgic reminder of home cooking focused on economy, flavor, and family. Fried bologna sandwiches were a simple and nostalgic lunch option that became popular for their affordability and satisfying flavor. Bologna, a processed meat, was sliced and pan-fried until it developed a crispy, caramelized edge, enhancing its taste and texture. Served hot on sliced bread, often with a bit of mustard or mayonnaise, these sandwiches offered a quick, inexpensive meal for families on tight budgets. This dish appeared frequently in vintage cookbooks as a go-to lunch for children and adults alike. It was especially common in working-class households where convenience and cost mattered most. Fried bologna sandwiches embodied the spirit of making the most out of affordable ingredients without sacrificing enjoyment. They were quick to prepare, required minimal kitchen skills, and provided comfort through their warm, savory flavors. The sandwich remains a nostalgic symbol of mid-century budget-friendly cooking. Split pea and ham soup with dumplings was a hearty, filling dish that combined protein-rich split peas, flavorful ham, and simple flour dumplings for added substance. The soup was slow-cooked to allow the peas to break down into a creamy base while the ham added smoky depth. Dumplings made from flour, water, and sometimes fat were dropped into the simmering soup to cook until soft and tender, thickening the meal and making it more satisfying. This recipe was popular in old Betty Crocker cookbooks as an economical and nutritious option that could feed large families affordably. It made use of inexpensive dried peas and leftover ham or cured meat, common during times when fresh meat was rationed or costly. The dumplings were a clever addition to make the soup feel more like a complete meal. Split pea and ham soup with dumplings reflected mid-century home cooks' focus on resourcefulness, flavor, and comfort. Cold slaw with mayonnaise and vinegar was a classic side dish known for its crisp texture and tangy flavor, perfect for balancing richer main courses. This budget-friendly cabbage salad combined shredded cabbage with a dressing made from mayonnaise, vinegar, sugar, and seasoning. The vinegar provided acidity to cut through the creaminess of the mayonnaise, while the sugar added a hint of sweetness to round out the flavors. Cold slaw was easy and quick to prepare, requiring no cooking, which made it popular in busy households. It appeared regularly in mid-century Betty Crocker cookbooks as a versatile accompaniment to barbecues, sandwiches, and casseroles. The recipe was adaptable, allowing cooks to add carrots, onions, or celery for extra crunch and color when available. Cold slaw was a refreshing and affordable way to add vegetables to meals, embodying the era's practical approach to home cooking. It remains a beloved side dish that continues to bring a nostalgic touch to tables. Cornbread dressing, also known as stuffing, was a traditional dish made by combining crumbled cornbread with simple seasonings, broth, and sometimes vegetables or meat scraps to create a flavorful, economical side. This recipe was a favorite in old Betty Crocker cookbooks and holiday cookbooks, often served alongside roasted meats during Thanksgiving and Christmas. Cornbread, made from inexpensive cornmeal, was crumbled and moistened with broth or water, then mixed with sautéed onions, celery, and herbs like sage and thyme. Some versions included bits of leftover meat or sausage for added richness. The mixture was baked until golden and set, resulting in a moist, savory dish that complemented main courses perfectly. Cornbread dressing was popular because it made use of affordable ingredients and leftovers, turning simple components into a comforting, festive staple. This dish reflected the ingenuity of mid-century home cooks who balanced flavor, tradition, and budget considerations in their meals. It remains a cherished part of American holiday cooking. Mock crab cakes were pan-fried patties made from canned fish, breadcrumbs, and seasonings, designed to imitate more expensive crab cakes without the high cost. These cakes combined canned whitefish like cod or pollock with binders such as eggs and breadcrumbs to hold the mixture together. Seasonings like onion, parsley, and lemon juice were added to mimic the delicate flavor of crab. The patties were shaped and fried until golden brown and crispy on the outside, tender on the inside. This recipe appeared in vintage Betty Crocker cookbooks as an affordable alternative to fresh seafood dishes, making it accessible for families with tight budgets or limited access to fresh crab. Mock crab cakes were served with simple sauces or salads, offering a satisfying seafood-flavored meal that did not require specialty ingredients. This dish reflected mid-century creativity in adapting recipes to fit economic realities while maintaining taste and appeal. Boiled dinner with cabbage and potatoes was a classic one-pot meal featuring root vegetables and cabbage boiled together until tender, creating a simple, filling, and economical dish. This recipe made use of affordable vegetables that were widely available and could be stored easily through cold months. The vegetables were simmered in water or broth, sometimes with added seasoning or bits of cured meat for flavor. Boiled dinners were praised in old Betty Crocker cookbooks for their ease of preparation and nutritious value. This dish was especially common in households aiming to stretch food supplies without sacrificing nourishment. The slow cooking process melded flavors and softened the vegetables, resulting in a comforting and warming meal. Boiled dinner with cabbage and potatoes exemplified mid-century frugal cooking, where practicality and wholesomeness were valued above fancy presentation. It remains a symbol of simple, hearty American home cooking. Milk toast with cinnamon sugar was a soothing comfort food made by soaking soft white bread in warm milk, then topping it with cinnamon sugar for sweetness and warmth. This dish was popular as a gentle breakfast or a remedy for upset stomachs, cherished for its simplicity and mild flavor. The bread was often toasted lightly before being softened with the milk, giving a tender but slightly textured bite. Cinnamon sugar added a pleasant aroma and a touch of indulgence without much expense. Milk toast appeared frequently in mid-century Betty Crocker cookbooks and family recipe collections as an easy-to-make, budget-friendly dish. It required minimal ingredients, all commonly found in most kitchens. Families valued milk toast for its nostalgic comfort and versatility, often serving it to children or the elderly. This simple dish remains a reminder of a time when warmth and familiarity in food were just as important as nutrition. Let's talk about an undisputed heavyweight champion. Let's talk about the Michael Jordan of Sunday dinners. See, you wake up on Sunday, and besides that initial sinking Sunday feeling, you wake up with a lot of hope. The hope that you'll wake, step out, and smell roast chicken with gravy being cooked up in the kitchen. It was a special occasion meal too, but it was something that moms always kept tucked away in their cooking revolver for Sunday, making sure to not make it any day prior. It made the whole thing a family tradition, but you could do that with most dishes if you tied them to a specific day. Bit like Pavlov, isn't it? This one was special purely because of its homeliness and quality. For a long while, it was something that was simple, yet irreplaceable. People thought this was the ultimate Sunday dinner, and it was the golden standard of American food. Simple, a well-balanced and nutritionally sound plate, and easy to eat. It made you tougher, it didn't hurt your wallet, and it tasted amazing. So a lot of people honestly just thought that there was nothing better to make. Beef roasts were popular too, but nothing beat chicken. Also, people had beef for their grilling sessions, so there was that. Another fact you may not know about a food you probably know all too well is turkey stuffing. Now, this stuff wasn't just for Thanksgiving, it was also made to go along with pork chips, stuffed fish, and chicken too. The idea was the same as what you would do with a turkey. People back then just looked at it and thought, if you can do it to that bird, why can't you do it to this one? Or a cow? Or a fish? Also, unlike a lot of the other dishes that are on the list so far, there was really no over-reliance on canned goods or processed food. There was no good substitute for homemade turkey stuffings, although that does exist now. Back then, people had to do it the old-fashioned way. So I guess if your idea of a Sunday is putting on some indie pop and getting to work in the kitchen, then yeah, this is for you. Homemade turkey stuffings typically used stale bread or cornbread and crackers that had been mixed in with a broth with onions and celery plus some butter in it. Those ready-made turkey stuffings I was talking about? They were a thing in 1972. So for a good 22 years, people relied heavily on saltines and Ritz crackers for the ideal stuffing. Homemade. When you think of popcorn, the Dust Bowl era is probably the last thing that comes to mind. Popcorn is the comfort food of the movie theaters, but believe it or not, they were still all the rage back in the 30s when options were limited. During the Dust Bowl, these crunchy snacks took on a whole new role. Yes, they paired popcorn with milk back then, and it became the combo of our dreams. When milk was available, it was poured over freshly popped popcorn to turn the snack into a whole meal. Milk was scarce, so it wasn't always available, but when it was, this meal was everyone's go-to. Popcorn was a cheap and easily accessible grain, and milk, if you were lucky enough to have some, added a bit of protein and calcium. It might not be your first choice for a fancy dinner, but it was a clever way to make do with what was available. Now, beans were a staple, and pairing them with ham was a southern favorite. It was a hearty meal that would stick to your ribs. And let's be honest, who doesn't love a good bowl of beans and ham hocks? A variation of this was known as the United States Senate bean soup, or simply Senate bean soup, which was a soup made with navy beans, ham hocks, and onion. It was served in the dining room of the United States Senate every day, in a tradition that dates back to the early 20th century. The original version included celery, garlic, and parsley. One of the two versions used today includes mashed potatoes. The ham hocks added flavor to the beans, and the whole thing was slow cooked until the meat fell off the bone. It might not have been gourmet, but it was definitely satisfying. Now, I'm not gonna lie, egg and olive sandwiches aren't making anyone's top 3 anytime soon, but they were pretty damn good for the value. I mean, a proper sandwich that's healthy, easy to carry, takes no work at all, and is cheap. That's just a good deal, and the kind of deal that you start compromising on your standards for just a tiny bit. I'm not exactly sure why this ever fell out of favor with people. I think maybe we just moved on from olives, or the specific combination of eggs and olives. Either way, this was one of the most common things to bring. Interestingly enough, though, depending on your neighborhood, office, and job, that would be completely untrue. Egg and olive sandwiches were more so something you would see in working to middle-class offices and neighborhoods exactly because they were so practical and affordable. You could throw a slice of cheese in there and some leftover ham, and you would pretty much be set for the rest of the shift. However, having that many fried eggs daily wasn't a good idea either. People would keep this in rotation around like 2 or 3 times in a day. As far as work lunches go, I can't lie. I think you can do better than cold potato and sausage salad. It's not really the worst thing to get in the world, but it's not something I want for my dear viewers. Just picture it yourself. You're at work, there's already an unnecessary scheduled HR meeting, someone's missing their shift, and your boss wants you to cover, and on top of all that, you open up your lunch only to find a perfectly below room temperature salad of, let's see, potatoes and sausages. I wouldn't blame you if you just skipped that entirely, went downstairs and got yourself a granola bar. Really. At least that fuels you, you know? Seriously though, this dish was trying to be really healthy, but one of the biggest things about following a healthy diet is how sustainable it is. Unfortunately for everyone, flavor is a big part of that, because it's the same with your work, you know? You like what you do. You feel like you don't work a day in your life. You eat what you like. You don't feel like you're dieting either. Escargot was definitely something I'd think twice or thrice about before I would claim that it was middle-class food. Back in the 1960s, $1 or $3 actually meant something. It wasn't petty, chump change like it is now. Escargot would fetch you a price of $3 or even $3.50 per dozen at fine restaurants, and that made it something people would really have to save up for. You could go to gourmet markets and visit them to get canned snails and attempt a homemade version of escargot, but you wouldn't have fresh snails, so at some point or the other it was going to fall short. Luckily, at least everything else wasn't something that would stress your budget out. You had garlic butter, parsley, and bread, and that meant that you could pretty much make this dish with the stuff you had on hand. The only real costly ingredient here was the protein. The snail-eating thing is something that was common back then, by the way, and yes, it was another thing we were trying out just because it was French. Despite that, they were actually a lot more tame in terms of flavor than you would expect. Lots of people even claimed it was much more similar to mushrooms than anything else, really. It was an experience that was in the reach of middle-class people, but definitely not comfortably or frequently. Now, canned ham really is just an old classic. You've seen it in cartoons, you've seen it in movies, you've seen it probably way too many times in your friend's fridge, and you've probably rated it twice as many more times. Canned ham is the kind of thing that your wife makes for you when she's mad, you know, instead of the usual loving meatloaf. But it's also the kind of thing you get so relieved to see when you see it sitting there, all by its lonesome in the cabinet, as your brain begins to experience a downpour of sandwich topping ideas. Hey, maybe you aren't a sandwich person. Maybe you like your ham in your salad. Maybe you like it as a pizza topping, or maybe you just wanted to stick it in your hot dog. The point of canned ham isn't how good it is and how nice it tastes, because let's be honest, after the 50th thousand time, I can't really feel the novelty either. The point is, every IM you see this, you know you're set, at least food-wise, yet it's at the same time something you would never see in a rich person's home, or even a lower-class person's home, because, well, one just didn't keep canned stuff and the other probably hunted their meat in the 50s. Homemade cobbler was a dessert that was made pretty much throughout the year in the 50s. Sometimes people would go for canned fruit in the winter when most of them were out of season. But when they were in season in the summers, oh boy, people would go absolutely guerrilla over this. I mean, suburban moms pretty much just sustained their entire existence via peach cobblers. Okay, I'll be a fair judge, cherry and blackberry cobblers were also pretty competitive. The real fun, at least for me with a cobbler, is that lovely little dollop of vanilla ice cream that comes with it, or some whipped cream on the top. I feel like it really adds to the entire vibe, the same way a limousine makes you feel like, yeah, it's prom night. Most Southern families used shortcut versions of cobbler by having things like canned biscuits or pre-made baking mixes though, and they skipped the ice cream in favor of a more crispier golden crust via cast iron skillet cooking. The real Southern thing about this is the way people would literally make cobblers outdoors with Dutch ovens if they could. And hey, if they didn't even have that, would you make enough cobblers in your lifetime? You learned to do it over an open fire, and that was a real core memory for a lot of people. How else do you think cobblers became so popular? Turkey and cranberry sandwiches are a bit of a hit or miss depending on the kind of stuff you prefer. But throughout Thanksgiving, you'd basically see people bringing nothing else but this. Why? Well, I know that you all know cranberries and cranberry jams, sauces, and desserts get really popular around Thanksgiving, but have you ever wondered why? Spoiler alert, it's not just tradition. See, across the Appalachians to California, throughout Wisconsin and Northern America, cranberries have been one of the few things that were always indigenous to our country. That's why we abuse them to the moon and back, you know? Then you throw in canned cranberries and convenience stores popping up in every neighborhood, and well, you start to see how people end up with so many leftovers. Turkey and cranberry sandwiches would be made so often to dispose of leftover cranberries that it wouldn't be uncommon to see pretty much everyone at work pulling up with one of these, though that did mean they got old really fast. Probably why nobody brings them anymore, to be honest. Honestly, there isn't an extreme amount of things you can do with a meatloaf. Sometimes, and I mean this from the best place possible, they just get old. Look, I'm a fan of my mom's meatloaf just like you are, and sure, I'd take it over a lot of other things, especially if I had a nasty hankering for comfort food, but it's just been overdone. What people used to do to cope with the fact that nothing they could do with their meatloaf, no mushroom sauce, no Dijon mustard or whatever could work, they would just throw some ketchup on it. Yup. It's the equivalent of boiling up some cup noodles and then an egg, throwing it together and pretending like you're in an episode of Naruto. It's just the most convenient thing people could do to get the most bang out of their buck. I mean, what would you prefer? Making an elaborate side, topping, sauce, and everything for a meatloaf you've had 1,000 times over? Or just turning the television on, sorry Kendrick, and relaxing with some easily available ketchup? Honestly, there isn't an extreme amount of things you can do with a meatloaf. Sometimes, and I mean this from the best place possible, they just get old. Look, I'm a fan of my mom's meatloaf just like you are, and sure, I'd take it over a lot of other things, especially if I had a nasty hankering for comfort food, but it's just been overdone. What people used to do to cope with the fact that nothing they could do with their meatloaf, no mushroom sauce, no Dijon mustard or whatever could work, they would just throw some ketchup on it. Yup. It's the equivalent of boiling up some cup noodles and then an egg, throwing it together and pretending like you're in an episode of Naruto. It's just the most convenient thing people could do to get the most bang out of their buck. I mean, what would you prefer? Making an elaborate side, topping, sauce, and everything for a meatloaf you've had 1,000 times over? Or just turning the television on, sorry Kendrick, and relaxing with some easily available ketchup? So you might notice that this issue where you need a lot of prep work for these dishes isn't exactly a unique one. Lots of dishes share it, and even cottage cheese and pineapple bowls have the same problem. Now, this dish was something that came out around the 60s and 70s, when Americans were really into trying out new things. One of the first things they opted for was pineapple, and this was thanks to Spam, which really made the American population warm up to an otherwise chronically detested fruit. This bowl was seen as healthy, full of protein, it was cold, and it could be prepared way ahead of time. The reason this lasted as long as it did was probably because of that, though only people that were super serious about their health and diet would be bringing this kind of stuff to the office. It wouldn't make sense to ignore the perfectly convenient, cheap, and delicious deli food on the corner of your office and go for a cottage cheese and pineapple bowl. Unfortunately, while this one has the convenience factor down, it couldn't last in the long haul because tastes have just changed too much from the days where bowls like this could work. Swedish meatballs were affordable, easy to make, and really just the perfect thing for entertaining a crowd. They became popular as a part of party culture, which was something that the 70s were known for, but it was something that had been bubbling well before that, in the 60s. Also, canned and powdered mixes of gravy were something that made the meatball preparation process infinitely easier. Ground beef here was also costing around 50 cents a pound, or at best 70, and pantry regulars like allspice and nutmeg or eggs were really common ingredients. Overall, it wasn't hard to make this dish, but it was hard to make it again and again. The demand for these meatballs was crazy. The simple truth is that Americans were bored of what they were eating. They had all the meatloafs and meatballs you could think of, and if they were going to have it again, they wanted it in a new and refreshing way. The answer to this dilemma was to take other cultures' ideas on meatballs, and that's how we got here. Oatmeal cakes are a warm, fuzzy childhood dish that many might associate with visits to their grandparents. Failing economy on one side, and grandma spoiling her favorite niece and nephew on the other. You just know they will always find a way, and lucky enough for us that the people of the times did it so craftily. In 35 minutes, you had a wondrous dessert to yourself that was quick enough to make after long, panic-filled days. Canned oatmeal on a soft cake glazed with an almond or peanut topping really set hearts on fire. Despite the cake's popularity back then, especially in the fitness and health community, it still did not stand the test of the time. Of course, it is a great way to spice up your oatmeal, regardless of how other breakfasts prepared with more culinary liberties taken would eventually replace it. Stauffer's Welsh rarebit is a frozen version of the classic Welsh dish, consisting of a cheese sauce poured over toasted bread. This rich and savory dish was introduced by Stauffer's in the mid-20th century, providing a quick and indulgent meal option for cheese lovers. The dish is a take on a traditional Welsh recipe that dates back to the 18th century, known for its comforting blend of cheese and bread. It's made from a blend of cheese, butter, cream, and seasonings, creating a smooth and flavorful sauce that is poured over slices of toasted bread. The dish is typically prepared in the oven or microwave, allowing for easy preparation and serving. Stauffer's Welsh rarebit is often enjoyed as a lunch or dinner entree, offering a comforting and hearty option that pairs well with a variety of sides, such as salad or vegetables. Cold pork pie was weird. It was supposed to be this British savory pastry that was probably the only dish best served cold after revenge, but I think it fell short on a lot of fronts. First, let's start with what constitutes a cold pork pie. This frigidly cold piece of British culture comes fully equipped with American favorites like lard, chopped or ground pork, nutmeg, mace, and lots of other stuffings. Plus, you know how people start experimenting with food and adding their own twists and turns wherever they can, no matter what. Who really sticks to tradition when you have like 5 different kinds of cheese to try? Anyway, while all of that sounds pretty good, fun, and a perfect environment for some serious brainstorming with what you can do with a pork pie, it was the savory jelly and cold aspect of it that kind of didn't stick too well. After the baking, you were supposed to pour a savory jelly made out of pork stock into the pie through a pretty tiny hole in the crust. Once the jelly would set and cool, it would enrich the flavor of the pie even more and help to preserve the meat as well. Pork pies were, for this reason, always served cold. However, America is a place that's really used to having their pork pies hot. And as you can probably tell, that's why you don't see bakeries, homes, or offices having cold pork pie days anymore. Have you ever wondered how we got to a point where mushrooms became as popular as they are? Stuffed mushrooms, in particular, were the apple of most people's eyes. A packet of white button mushrooms would run you about 30 cents and keep you satisfied and full for the rest of the evening. The fillings were dirt cheap and probably things you already had on hand in your pantry too. Who doesn't have some breadcrumbs, sausage, basic herbs, and garlic laying around? Plus, mushrooms were largely free for a lot of people. Curious how? During the Depression, people really picked a few survival skills up. One of those happened to be foraging in the wild for fruit and other edible things in the wilderness. People found out that mushrooms were actually one of the greatest gifts nature ever gave us, and they got hooked. Bad. Like, really bad. Mushrooms were seen as an incredibly versatile ingredient. What couldn't you do with these babies? Throw them on pizza, put them in your soup, smash them between a burger, stir-fry them, roast them, serve them at a cocktail party, or just eat them as they are, or put them in a stew? Do you see where I'm going with this? You can't, because I'm going literally everywhere you can imagine. That's how much you can do with just a simple serving of stuffed mushrooms. French versions were often a lot more buttery, while Italian versions were a lot more prone to being filled with garlic. Either way, what you could say for sure in your life was that this is a dish you really wouldn't regret waiting around for. Around the later half of the 20th century, there was this big public paranoia that had spread concerning health and the after effects of the way Americans had been eating. Thanks to all that rage, we got dishes like vegetable aspic cups. See, lots of Americans were coming home to an angry mom, a worried wife, or a dad who just kept saying he wouldn't pay for the doctor's fees when your eating habits would eventually circle back around to bite you. It kind of did set fear into people's hearts, especially since the arguments were so convincing. Who could deny that they were eating Kentucky Fried Chicken and McDonald's like addicts back then, or even now? That's why there was this newfound room for fusion food or experimental recipes like vegetable aspic cups. Before, you could tell somebody about vegetables that were set in these tomato-flavored gelatins, and they'd just laugh at you. A chilled salad on top of that? But thanks to how easy convenience food culture had made things, with how you could just buy gelatin and frozen veggies whenever you needed, this was actually a really solid and healthy work lunch option. Friendly's Watermelon Roll is a unique ice cream dessert shaped like a watermelon slice, with a watermelon-flavored center, lemon-flavored rind, and chocolate chips as seeds. This refreshing treat was introduced by Friendly's in the 1980s and quickly became a favorite summer dessert. It was part of Friendly's seasonal summer menu, which featured other unique frozen treats as well. The ice cream is crafted to resemble a watermelon, with vibrant colors and realistic detailing that make it visually appealing. Friendly's Watermelon Roll is made from a combination of watermelon and lemon sherbet, creating a light and fruity flavor. The addition of chocolate chips as seeds adds a touch of sweetness and fun to the dessert, enhancing its playful appearance. Speaking of food combinations, this next one will definitely blow your mind. Have you ever thought of combining beef with gelatin? If not, this is your sign to twist things up a bit and try this one out. There's a reason why this one was the talk of the town during the Dirty 30s. The gelatin was used to thicken soups and stews, while the beef added a hint of protein. Now, since the supply was always limited, don't expect a whole beef steak in your bowl. Just a few chopped up bits and pieces of meat and every few bites was all you got. This meal was designed to be full, and it was left bland for the most part. However, some people in the South decided to spice things up a bit by remixing the recipe according to their likes. One such recipe included canned corned beef, canned peas, gelatin, lemon juice, and vinegar. We wouldn't consider pairing these ingredients today, but it was a lifesaver for those who had to make it through the hard times. So, despite what you might hear about meatball subs, or what you might even see about them, because let's be honest, we've all seen way too many episodes of Brooklyn 99 where somebody was working a sub, they weren't actually super mainstream. No, they got that reputation in the 60s and 70s, but it was a niche idea and recipe that had pretty much just kept itself to Italian-American communities. It definitely wasn't a local deli item you could expect on every menu, or something that was even a standard. Italian-American communities in cities like Philadelphia and Boston were the first ones who started popularizing this combination. Italian bakeries and delis run by Italian-Americans were one of the first few places that started using homemade meatballs inside of solid sourdough bread, and the idea was beginning to catch on quick. The meatballs were made from a mix of pork, veal, and ground beef, and they were also seasoned with a lot of Parmesan and parsley, but they were slow-cooked in a homemade tomato sauce, which also made them super tender. See, today's subs are different too, because they have all kinds of toppings and melted or shredded mozzarella, but you didn't used to have any of that back then. It wasn't even served on hoagie rolls. Most delis back then kept it on a crusty Italian loaf or a French baguette roll. This was the origin story of meatball subs, as we know them today, you could say. What's not to love about a 3-ingredient delicious sauce? White sauce was the comforting meal you look forward to coming home to every night. It was a break from the bland foods of the dirty 30s, and the best part? It required just 3 common ingredients that were already staples in everyone's kitchen: flour, butter, and milk. This sauce is like an easy breezy addition of the bechamel sauce, which is one of the mother sauces of French cuisine. This sauce is made from a white roux and milk, seasoned with ground nutmeg. Since we didn't have fancy ingredients on hand, the simple ones did the job. This sauce was used to top pasta, vegetables, casseroles, and even lasagnas. If you were lucky enough to have a bit of cheese in your pantry, it could be turned into a cheesy sauce. If you had some herbs, it could be seasoned to add extra flavor. And let's be honest, in tough times, a little creamy sauce can make everything taste just a bit better. Beef bourguignon in the 1960s in America was something that was a lot more affordable than you would originally think. See, the way beef developed, it was becoming too popular and common for the government to not do something about the price. It settled around 50 to 80 cents a pound, making it a pretty cost-effective dish for what it was worth. The rest, you just needed a couple of dollars for, vegetables and table wine included. French influences like Julia Child and her book, Mastering the Art of French Cooking, a 1961 classic, made beef bourguignon something that home cooks could finally begin trying in real life. See, while beef was getting more affordable, it wasn't exactly something people could ever experiment with. If your idea went wrong, you just wasted some beef. Or worse, you wasted a pound of it. The vegetables and wine were really replicable, but a lot of people couldn't stand wasting beef, especially since not everyone lived near butcher shops. Anyway, now that we have that out of the way, let's talk about some areas where this dish thrived. So, whether it's Connecticut or Detroit, Chicago, or New York, you'll find lots of places in history cashing in on the trend of beef bourguignon. This, after all, was where it made its name. Even in places like Minneapolis and Massachusetts, French influence had people by a chokehold. The savoriness and tanginess from the red wine reduction was something that drew more and more customers to restaurants every day. The tightly sealed in and dense flavor from the extensive braising made this a standout dish, one to remember, and definitely one to tell your friends about. Cornish game hens were a pretty forgettable moment in American history, to be honest. I mean, no wonder they are on this list after all. So, Cornish game hens were something that were a tiny bit more costly than chicken, but still relatively affordable. The minimum price for a game hen would be around 80 cents, with most places easily coming to or exceeding $1. These were also sold frozen, which was really a massive draw for people to start buying these. See, before, you had to pretty much take the entire bird home and find a way to use it unless you were okay with wasting precious meat. These individual frozen servings meant that people could pick and choose the amount of meat they actually wanted to buy. This was actually something of a fine dining moment too for places like Los Angeles and San Francisco, although it was something that went for a good price in most upscale restaurants, but still it didn't have a lot of star power. The flavors were soft and mild, and you had to really chew to get a sense for what you were having. It didn't last long beyond the 60s, and I get it. This decade is full of things to talk about, seriously. Aunt Jemima frozen pancakes are frozen pancakes that offer a quick and convenient breakfast option, often paired with syrup or fruit. Introduced by Aunt Jemima in the 1970s, these fluffy pancakes were a staple for busy mornings or lazy weekends. Known for their pancake mixes, Aunt Jemima expanded their line to include frozen pancakes to cater to families on the go. The pancakes are made from a classic pancake batter and then frozen to preserve their freshness. They could be heated in the microwave or toaster and were often served with toppings like butter, syrup, or fruit. Aunt Jemima frozen pancakes were particularly popular for their light and fluffy texture, as well as their convenient preparation, making them a beloved breakfast choice that offered a comforting and delicious way to start the day. Tell us your favorite budget meal from old Betty Crocker cookbooks. Hit like if you enjoyed, and subscribe for more nostalgic recipes.